All right. Welcome to the committee room. We're going to reconvene here. Thanks, those of us who joined from the audience, for coming on over with us there tonight. We are going to continue our conversation of the Fairview Business District, your Fairview Avenue Implementation Plan. Tonight we've got some additional sort of development, if you will, of some of the things we've been talking about, uses and land related entitlements and how that looks on paper. You also have some draft kind of use tables, which starts to look a little bit more like an ordinance. And so tonight we're going to talk through that stuff. We're going to see if we all like the way it looks now that we see it on paper, and entertain any questions we might have. So, Stan, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, Council, audience members. I think the Mayor stole my first slide here, so we're good to go. We're moving forward here. We'll talk a little bit about the project description, look at the map again, as to the Mayor's point, talk about some bulk regulations, and then get into some land uses as well. This project consists of these various bullets here. Again, we talked in the past about this as a multi-year project. Tonight, moving forward in the short term, we're talking about defining the project area and amendments to the zoning ordinance and the zoning map as well. How do we get from the comprehensive plan to the zoning ordinance? Again, we talk about the comp plan being a visionary document, regulatory framework, key concepts, and zoning ordinance where it's really nuts and bolts. We're here tonight again at the regulatory framework to talk about key concepts, discussion and concurrence. This is the Fairview focus area map. You may recognize it. We've been using this for a while. A couple of things that have changed since our last meeting. Fairview 1 is in the blue, Fairview 2 is green, and Fairview 3 is yellow. So this blue area, we have extended that over towards more of the Maple and the train track intersections. We've included these triangle pieces there from off of Fairview Avenue. We've moved the green off, so we think this area could go as Fairview 1. Additionally, in past maps, if you see the Rogers Street area here, I think the green extended over potentially into the north side of Rogers. That's been moved back, so Rogers Street would in essence be the dividing line. We do know that on Austin there's some single-family homes, so we thought that was important to move that line south so that Rogers would be the divider line, which we see a lot with different zoning districts as the street being a change in the zoning district. Other than that, the map has stayed the same with some overlap here where we're looking at different areas to still trying to explore some ideas on those areas. So to the Mayor's point, we did sort of start developing some framework ideas here. Fairview 1, again, is more of a downtown area. So I'll go ahead and go through the Fairview 1 section, and we'll come to Fairview 2. And then the next slide, we'll get into some other items as well. So maximum height in the Fairview 1, we're looking at 60 feet or 5 stories. We do want to have a minimum height in there where we're going to create sort of a downtown streetscape, street wall location. So 24 feet or 2 stories. We talked about a height bonus. It's not applicable here. Setbacks, because we do want a downtown type feel, there's no setbacks street, side, or rear. However, if you are adjacent to an F3 or R zone property, the street setback will be 25 feet for the first 35 feet of that property. There's a graphic that explains this, but basically, if you're on an adjacent property line, the first 35 feet adjacent to the property line would have to have a setback, so you're not putting a building upright at the property line. Similarly, when we're on a side yard, it's 5 feet or 10% allowed width if you're adjacent to an F3 or R to allow some sort of setback. And then again, if there's a back-to-back with an F1, F3 or residential, there's a 20-foot setback. That's a standard setback throughout town as a 20-foot rear setback. We talked about a build-to zone previously, so yes, we would want to build to zone. It's generally you can build at the property line or up to 5 feet back. 80% of the building has to be in the build-to zone in the primary street setback, so in a corner, it's usually defined primary and secondary, and 30% on the secondary street. So if you just have one street frontage, you would meet the 80% here. Mm-hmm. We do have some graphics that explain this a little bit better with some 3D modeling that hopefully bring that all to life. So that's the Fairview 1. We're really looking at that to be the downtowns or street wall, really active areas. Fairview 2, if you remember the map, sort of stretches out along Rogers and 2nd Street there. So in this case, it's 48 feet, 4 stories, so we're trying to step down to standard zoning, taller, higher, denser there, and then coming back down. No minimum here, so a 1-story building could work for a user. And then we talked about a height bonus here. So we went with 60 feet or 5 stories, which would bring it to the Fairview 1. But again, this would be as if you were adjacent to portions of the building that are set back at least half the lot depth. So you have a 300-foot deep lot, the last 150 feet could in theory be 5 stories, 60 feet. Again, with setbacks, 0 for the street, we're still looking for that building to be close to the property line. A little bit of a setback here on the sides and again on the rear because we're getting more into not as intense areas there. Again, this also comes down to adjacency. We talked about this being more locational. So we're looking at, if you're adjacent to an F3, then again, there's a 25-foot setback to try to allow some of that with your neighbors. Adjacent to F1, no side yard setback would be required, so that can be a street wall area. And then if you're adjacent here with the railroad tracks, no rear setback, so you can build as close. Now, obviously, the building code comes into this and what you're allowed for openings, so there are some items there as well. But for zoning, those are sort of the setbacks we're looking at. Build-to zones, similarly, yes, but there's a little bit more allowance to set the building back up to 10 feet from the property line, and then similar 80 to 30%. So those are Fairview 1 and 2 with height setbacks in the build-to zone. When we go to density, so if you wanted to, what can I build if I want to build apartments? It's 54 per acre, so Marquis on Maple is at 54, that's on Maple Avenue. And then is there a density bonus? So staff is exploring a density bonus for inclusive housing. It's something we have to work through to see how that works. We really wanted to make it a zoning type of density bonus. Parking is in the F1 would be a 1.4 per apartment. Again, that's consistent with the requirements that are in downtown. No parking spaces for businesses in this area. There is a fair amount of parking available on street and in some of the lots that the village owns that would be available for businesses. And then with design guidelines, we've had success in the downtown with our design guidelines. So yes, new buildings. So if you were to come in and redevelop, that would have to comply with the downtown design guidelines. But we think it's also important if people want to reinvest that we're not limiting them in terms of their ability to be creative with their buildings. In the F2, again, sort of the model of going higher density in the middle and less dense out, 43 units per acre. So the apartment building that is just immediately west of Official Park is 42 dwelling units per acre, and then 4929 Forest, which is north side of the tracks on Forest on the east side of the street, that's 46 dwelling units per acre. So, and then again, bulk of the building and size of the building has a lot to depend on whether it's studios or 2 or 3 bedroom units. But those are some examples. Again, density bonus there. Parking spaces, we were again 1.4 per apartment. We're finding that that's really good in the downtown to meet those numbers and provide parking. And then we were looking at to try to not have to have people worry about providing so much parking because that takes up a lot of space, and try to really reinvigorate this area. So we had discussed 1.5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of commercial space, in essence. That would just be a standard thing. And then also to try to encourage some sort of entertainment, one per 8 occupants for assembly or entertainment uses. So again, not requiring a lot of parking here, trying to reinvigorate the area and not limit investment opportunities based on parking. With design guidelines, no requirements for that. Again, we want that investment in that area, not to try to inhibit any investment that people might be making in the area. So that gets us through density, parking, and design guidelines. This is a density table and a parking data table, so we can share sort of what's been going on. Dash, which was recently built, is 124 units, 70 feet tall. It's parked at 1.4. Again, these were the 2 that I had mentioned about the 43 units and similar to F2. And then some of the nearby ones, so Prospect and Rogers is right across the tracks here. That is 27 units per acre. That's in the downtown transition, which requires 2 parking spaces per unit, so they provided that. And then Second and Fairview is a recent development, which is 18 units, 34 feet in height, and 2 spaces per unit as well. So that's all the parking and the density and some height for some comparisons to what we're talking about tonight. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the build-to zone, just to clarify some items on that. So this is the current regulations in the downtown zoning districts. So 100 feet of building, you're allowed an outdoor patio that's 30 feet wide or 33% of the facade, whichever is less. So in our graphic, we've put it over here in the corner, you can put it in the middle, you can put it on the side, wherever you want it in the front, but we've just identified it here. So this would meet our compliance. The understanding is that this outdoor patio is open to the sky. So that's one of the key things we want to make sure to talk about tonight. So this is what's allowed. A is allowed. There's some different options if this is something the council and the community wishes to look at, would be to be able to expand potentially this width and say, okay, you can be 50 feet wide if you wanted to be, or 40 feet, or if there's a percentage, that's something we can work through and develop. Again, the important thing here with the current regulations is you can only go back 25 feet. So that maintains somewhat of the street wall here, but if it's something that a council wanted to explore and go wider, that's something we can definitely talk about and take a look at. One other option would be to say, okay, well maybe you keep the width the same, but you allow it to go deeper. So maybe it's 30 feet, maybe it's 50 feet. So this rectangle, we can work through that based on discussion, community desires, and council desires to see how it can go. So we can really play with this rectangle in terms of how we want it to show. So this is a graphic here, a really quick graphic that we're using with SketchUp. Jason did these for us, so really great job on this. This is A, which is currently allowed. So again, you can see this is 100 foot wide from there to there. Oops. But then we have this 30-foot opening. This is B, which has a 50-foot wide opening. And then C, which has sort of the courtyard feel in that way. So some different options and different views about how this could look as well if we went with some different options here. Again, these are the buildings at their maximum height, so some people might not build that tall, but this would be what we'd be looking at in terms of how these would lay out with the street walls. We did have a question about an outdoor patio that may be underneath the facade, underneath the building. And looking at our code, this would be actually allowed, where the outdoor patio is underneath sort of a facade on the second, third, and fourth floors here. So this would be allowed by current code today. So in this picture here, you can see people eating outside, but underneath the roof, the floor of the second floor. So this would be allowed and could continue to remain to be allowed then as well. So, and then we talked a little bit about the Fairview 2 and the height bonus here earlier. So again, this is another graphic here showing the street here. The first 100, well, this is 150 foot wide, 150 foot deep plot as shown. So the first 75 feet would be 4 stories tall, and then the last 75 feet could be 5 stories tall there. So just trying to show a little stair stepping down if the railroad tracks were in the back here as well. And then this is what an F1 and F2 building adjacent could look like. So, if we look at the Maple Avenue when it's redeveloped, there's always a little bit of space between the buildings for some safety and just building close to property lines. So this is sort of the massing of those two buildings next to each other there as well. And then I will, after we talk about F3 requirements a little bit, we'll go into the F1 to F3 and the F2 against the F3 as well. So moving to the F3, this is reading more like a traditional residential zoning classification. As we heard from council at the last meeting, that this should be more typical residential type development in here as well. So maximum height is 35 feet. That's what it is throughout the community for single family residential. No minimum, no height bonus. Setbacks, streets 25, sides are 5 feet or 10%, 20 feet, all standard for most of our residential zoning classifications. No build to zone here. So this again is going to have a feel of a residential neighborhood with redevelopment or reinvestment. Density is 4 per acre. That's our current standards here. No density bonus. Parking spaces in residential is always 2 outside of the downtown areas. Again, no parking spaces for business because what we heard was we don't really want businesses to infiltrate into this area in the F3. And then no design guidelines. So build whatever design you would like for your house to be. So when we look at F1 and F3 adjacency on these, this is a typical, taller building in the F1 here, and then this would be a standard 35-foot tall peak to the gable there. So you can see here in this example, we have a little bit of a setback here where the first 35 feet of the F1 building has to meet this 25-foot setback line. So again, that sort of provides that sort of buffer there or change to provide so it's not right up to the corner there. And again, this house, the buildable area is this area, so this house could be up or down or front or back here as well. And this building is shown pretty much maxed out in terms of sizes with the dimensions as well. The next one would be F2 to F3. Again, we see the setback here from this front facade. And then here in this example, you can see the step back, assuming this is along the railroad tracks there as well. And then getting into a little bit of the uses that we talked about at the last meetings and tonight. What we heard from council, the direction was all these residential housing types that are in the F3. This is exclusively on the F3, so I just wanted to talk about that. That we have our detached single-family house with a detached garage, attached single-family house with an attached garage, duplex, and a multifamily, all okay in the F3, is what we heard last time from the village council. When we talked about residential accessory uses and structures, this is allowed currently under the code, the extended family within the house. But we heard there might be some openness to expanding it to a potentially a detached garage or potentially expanding the size. But what we did here was the council direction at the last meeting was to not provide an opportunity for me to own the house and to rent the house out, the back garage to a coworker or a friend. So it was really about some sort of a family connection there as well. So what the proposal would be to expand the family member eligibility. Right now it's limited to elderly folks or people with disabilities, but maybe we need to look at expanding it to a college kid coming home or an aunt or an uncle or some other family member or household member. Allow the unit to be in a detached accessory structure and potentially expand the allowable size. The allowable accessory structure right now is 1,000 square feet, so that's something we could look at and maybe explore if it was part of the house as well. So there's some options, but these are the framework there as well. Then we talked about home occupation concepts. So right now, currently allowed is there's a space limit and a size limit for home occupation, but maybe we could, based on last council discussions, expand the size of it, and maybe we allow it to occur in a detached structure as well. So that's what staff heard from the last council meeting, where these three options might be able to move forward as well to expand those options. So using that, we would be looking at increasing the allowable size of the home occupation. We still want it to be a home occupation, so I couldn't own the home and allow Dave to work out of it at the house and have an office there, but it would have to be somebody that's an occupant of the home having a home occupation, and we would still want to keep it as an accessory unit, so we don't really want it to become the primary focus of that housing unit, the F3. Allow the accessory home occupations to be in a detached accessory structure. We did hear about allow multiple employees, but maybe limit the number of employees that can be on site. A lot of people are working remotely, so maybe you have 3 employees, but they all work remote, and one at a time they come into the office at different times, or something like that. And then to look at allow additional service uses as well, so expand the use of allowable uses, but however, limit with no retail, no restaurants. So really sort of we're trying to limit the impacts on the neighborhood while still expanding the uses and the allowable uses. So those were extended family and then home occupation. So then, as the mayor alluded to, staff took council direction and looked at a couple different things with this getting more into the zoning of the areas and what uses would be allowed. So we see what we're trying to be is more permissive. That's one of the main key points that we've had in this whole process, to be more permissive, to allow some more energy to occur in this area. So we talk about in the F1 here, allow apartments on the second floor as special use and special use in the F2, but then permitted in the F3. And then we got some group livings here and nursing homes in the F2 and F3 as well. So trying to be more permissive. And then we have our zoning definitions over here, and then we tried to provide some more layman's terms in terms of understanding that, 'cause sometimes it gets a little nuanced. And then we have different land uses here, public, civic, and institutional. So again, a lot of these are carrying across with special uses as well. So again, we all know that those would have to come before council. But then permitting some of these natural resource preservation, museum, safety schools, and some of these wireless and utility services as well. Then we get into more of the traditional things there. So animal services, we were talking about being more permissive with boarding and grooming and veterinary care in the F1, F2s. Assembly and entertainment, again, that was something we heard. We're more permissive here in these areas. So this could be a bowling alley, an arena, a billiard center, broadcast or recording studios, which are really about audio and video productions. And then we get into commercial services. So we did keep contractors as a prohibited use in those areas, but again, we did provide business support services and consumer maintenance repair. So these business support are caterers, copy shops. I don't know if there's any Kinko's anymore, but those type of places, and then dry cleaners, locksmiths, and so more of the maintenance and stuff like that we're seeing. And then we get into personal improvement services, so general are really barber, beauty salons, nail salons, health and fitness, which are yoga studios, studio instructionals. This is to be music education, artist studios more permitted, fortune telling, massage therapy, tattoo, research services or research and testing labs in office settings. So not really a large research area, but more in an office, smaller office setting there as well. We do have daycare centers would be allowed in the F1, but special in the F2, home daycares in the F3, restaurants, wine and beer boutiques cover a lot of things. Bed and breakfast is especially used in the F3 as well. So we're really trying to be more permissive, so we hope you see more P's and S's in these areas as well, to try to get some different uses in this area. Continuing to move down, we have a lot of the same with business, professional, medical office, dental offices. Convenience good, that's grocery store, drugstore, so that's if people are living there, they're going to want to stop, pick up a gallon of milk. Consumer shopping goods are department stores, electronics store, hobby shops, permitted. And then we have building supplies and equipment, which are hardware stores. And then trade schools, which can be cosmetology school to vocational schools. So really trying to be permissive in this area as best we can. Some of these, like convenience good and shopping good, have some limitations in the downtown core and the downtown transition. But since we're trying to be permissive, we had not identified any limitations at this point. As we move down the zoning use table, land use table, we heard clear vehicle sales and sort of vehicle auto-oriented uses not. And same thing with some of the wholesale distribution and storage as well. The one thing we did here was artesian industrial, which would be permitted in the F1 and F2, trying to provide that more opportunity for some of those spaces as well. So brewery, cabinet shop, ceramic studio. So that runs through our land uses. I believe, nope, one more. Again, no auto uses, so that's drive-throughs, no. Adult use cannabis, medical cannabis, no, in those zoning districts as well. So next steps, obviously discussion tonight. We'll work at the council's direction, council pace. But this could be a potential schedule. You know, if we have a good discussion tonight, we're going to move forward. Direct staff to do that. The village is working on a Fairview Focus Implementation Plan webpage for the public. We could go through ordinances of preparation, have council review them, and then we would begin the public hearing process, open houses for folks and impacted by this plan, and then come back through the plan commission and through the village council to approve any changes. Mayor, I think I've talked enough right now, so I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Some guy behind you just stood up.
Got it, right? Not a lot of stuff there. No big deal. We got this. So if you're watching this or participating at home, you think, oh, that's a lot of information. It is. Keep in mind that staff spends 60 to 90 minutes in meetings with individual council members, so they're not hearing this for the first time. That's why Stan was able to go through it so quickly. We're looking for direction on anything in here. There's the map, right? There's the bulk density setback concepts. We got parking concepts. We got the build-to zone. And then we have land uses. So with that frame up, Mayor, maybe that'd be a little helpful as you try to guide us through this discussion.
It is helpful. So our individual meetings, our previous meetings in this room on this is an attempt at kind of coalescing that into next step towards an ordinance, as we mentioned early. And so if really the first thing is to sort of circle back with this group and see if anything jumps out that we need either additional clarification on, or man, that's not the way I think I remember hearing it, that kind of a thing. That's the purpose of tonight. So anybody want to, let's work through what Dave's got up there one section at a time. Simply because one of the benefits of all us being together is we hear what each other has to say, right? So if somebody says something about a map, somebody else might trigger a map. Let's focus on one at a time. So relative to the map, does anybody have any reactions or things they want to bring up?
Kind of related to the map.
What?
I said a little bit related to the map. It's kind of a combo of the, so I have just kind of written down, thinking about like those F1, F3 spots where those intersect, and kind of seeing the image of, you know, the taller building next to the house. And it does remind me a lot of the recent Main Street discussion that we had with the residential towards the back. And it just felt a little bit intrusive. So I don't know that I have an answer for it right now, but it does make me a little bit uncomfortable of how much 1 and 3 overlap there is. It's much more than we have with the downtown. downtown business to, you know, what would pretty much be residential, right? Like skipping the transition. It seems like there's a lot of spot there that has a lot of 1 and 3 overlap, and it just gives me a little bit of pause when thinking about having those taller buildings next to a small single-family home.
I have a comment related to that as well, so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just, so, this gets us not off, this, I'd be taking us more off the map if I addressed that, so we just want to get through the.
Yeah, let's get through the map.
Yeah,
I-
I was kind of thinking about it in the build to zone category, but
Yeah.
yeah, I've got comments on the same sort of.
We're definitely going to get to that.
I know,
There's
it's a
several
combo.
conversations starting here on that subject. What about map lines for the moment?
But that's why, like, that's where I'm like, do we need to readjust maybe some of where we have to, you know,
Let me jump in. I had some very similar thoughts. I think you're on the right thing. One thing I thought was we had made this sort of adjustment to Rogers, using Rogers as a little bit of delineation, and I wonder if we shouldn't be doing the same thing on Second.
yeah.
Point Bob.
I want to change the screen, but, you know, we pulled back F2 to really the south side of Rogers, and I'm wondering if it ought to be limited to, over here, it ought to be limited to the north side of Second. For that very
Yeah,
reason, right? If you
right,
start doing
exactly.
F2, right, sort
Yeah.
of right up against an R4 or whatever those might
Yeah.
be.
There are other ways to address the concern, though,
Yeah,
which.
Maybe.
I will get to.
Yeah, I've got a thought on that too. We might be on the same wavelength there. I think this, resident of the south side of Austin Street really appreciates using Rogers as that
Yeah.
line of demarcation. I think that was a nice change. And I'm open to the idea on Second Street there, but I think perhaps some of the other ideas might ameliorate the concerns.
Can I just have a question of clarity?
Yeah, you bet.
There is no real overlap. The only overlap is on this cloud-based
Correct.
photo.
right.
Which is intentionally a cloud at this point.
Yeah, no,
Eventually, it becomes a hard line.
I am
Yeah.
pro-clouds. I just want to go on record. Clouds. I guess it does make it gives a little false sense of them
Right.
being closer than they
Right,
maybe
but
are.
could
The
be across the
roads.
street, yeah.
I mean, it's going to be a street likely that's
That's
changing
right where it's
that.
going to go. I think everybody's kind of talking around the same
Yeah.
things, and this is where
Yeah.
I haven't been a planner in a long time, Stan, so if I get this wrong, please
Sure.
jump in. But I think the idea is a combination of where the 1 would meet a 3, and as it relates to height and setbacks. So if we end up doing a map where there's always a street in between, would that address things?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think, as we're talking, there's a lot of overlap up here, and I don't think that we've explored that in terms of that.
Right.
But to Manager Fieldman's point, if it's a street, then it's a little
Yeah.
bit better
Yes.
of a transition.
But yeah, I just wanted to get that out early.
I mean, up in that corner where you were just pointing, Stan, there's some overlap in terms of the colors, to be sure, but when you think about the properties that are on that corner,
Yeah.
I have zero concern. I mean, you've got already multi-story, multifamily there,
Right.
as well as stuff that ought to be multi-story. I mean, it should be redeveloped.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that to me is a non-issue.
But as we tighten this map up and move towards zoning, if the concern was the incompatibility of height bulk setback
Yeah.
between F1 and F3, if there's a street between,
We're good.
Is it
Yep.
not from the council?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Any other map-related questions? We'll just keep walking down Dave's list. Is that density?
Density and setbacks, those slides.
Bulk density, you want to continue? That's
Yeah, I mean,
kinda-
I
that was kinda-
appreciate the flexibility with this part. Of one, having, a potential height bonus in Fairview too, right, if you're backing up to the tracks, because
Yeah.
why not,
Mhm.
right? But, again, this does kind of help to ameliorate some of those issues when we see those step down. So I think that this was a really creative approach, and I like all of that. And, yeah, I think that's, yeah, I'm good with this. I think it was a really great creative use of.
Mike?
Yeah, so, a few things off the bat. First of all, footnote 3. Yeah, I think that should also apply to F2 rear yards. if adjacent to F3 or R zone property, it was 20-foot setback, I think this, maybe we want the same thing with the rear yard in the Fairview 2
Okay.
situation. That's my feeling. I also feel like when we look at some of these, looking at the adjacencies between the F1, F2, adjacent to F3 or R district zones, that we ought to consider some sort of height limitation when you're at least kind of similar to what we're doing with the bulk or the build-to zone on the street side, that we do something that's basically for so many feet back from that property line adjoining that F3 or residential zone district, that there's a 35-foot height limitation, similar to what you have
Okay.
in the F3 or the R zoning.
Setback, height tied to setback.
So it's kind of, yeah, so kind of the concept is similar to when we looked at in the, when we're looking at the F2, that bonus, going, if you go back halfway, you can go higher. Well, I'm saying kind of the reverse of that.
Reverse of that, yeah.
If you get that stand, I'm not.
Yeah. So I think Commissioner, if I
Yeah.
can, so where we have a height bonus here, if for the back half of F2 when you adjacent to the tracks, you're saying almost the opposite. So if you're at 60 feet here, but you're adjacent, and if you're F1 and you're 60 feet here, but you're adjacent to an F, back to back, then so many feet back you can only go down to you can only go 35 feet in height.
Or if you're alongside.
Yeah, side
alongside
setbacks too,
something like
right?
that,
I was thinking the very same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really about the intensity and the height being furthest away from those F3 or the
Stepping up
residential
is
zoning,
further away.
and potentially F2 as well.
We used to think
Yes.
about this too in terms of daylighting, right? If you drew,
Right.
if you kind of drew an angle line from the
Mhm.
property line, trying to, so you're not totally blocking off the side.
Right.
Sure.
Property, backyards and such.
Yeah.
So that was something I'm interested in. I'm wondering if the 35-foot width for the street setback widths with the adjacencies, how do we come up with that 35?
That's what's in the existing zoning ordinance for the downtown.
Okay, thank you.
That carve out, that notch thing, right?
Yeah, I just wonder what that was rooted in. And then, let's see, consider, so we're not in the build two zone yet, I'm just looking to make sure we got a few minutes here. I think that's it for me right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, so I think I need a little more clarity on what was just proposed before I can get behind it. Can you go to the slide with the Monopoly Hotel next to the, yeah, it's a technical term. It's a technical term, Davenport.
That was good.
So are we suggesting that up to 35 feet, the height of the blue building would have to match the height of the red building? Up to 35 feet on the side?
It's kind of what.
Some distance
Yeah,
in
that's
from the
why.
property line.
Yeah.
So that building could go all the way up, but it couldn't go all the way up until it got farther into its own property.
Okay.
Step back some before it can go up.
I think what Commissioner Davenport was saying was these, I'll just say these 2.5 blocks here wouldn't be allowed, but if you extend this facade
Sure.
back, oops,
Yeah.
this facade back here,
Yes.
that part could be taller, but this part would have to be more.
So,
Correct.
Yeah.
okay,
Uh,
and the clarity of, it's also off the street at that, so this one demonstrates that there's a 35-foot setback from the front that matches the residential or the house there, right?
Correct, so it's 25 feet from the property line back because. this-
Sorry, yep,
And then
25
it's
back.
35 feet, I'll say
Okay.
east to west in this case.
And so the addition would be theoretically at the height restriction that is similar to that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I think that makes sense.
And also this-
So, Stan, sticking with the height piece, along the train tracks, there are some fairly decent grade changes. Just for everybody's edification, could you walk through how tall you could go as you would see it from the street versus where it might end up deeper down by the train tracks?
So the village's height requirements are measured from the street property line. So if it's a corner, let's say this, for example, was a street, we would measure the 3 corners and determine height. So but in this case, let's just say this is another F1 over here, F1 and F3. We measure it still from the street here, but if the grade slopes down, you in theory could see another level sort of below grade. So off the railroad tracks, if the street's higher and the railroad tracks are lower, you might see a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a 6-story building off the back there as well. So, like, for example, if you park in the downtown parking deck and you look at Marquis on Maple on, looking south from the parking deck, you will see it's taller in the back because there's a garage, but because the village measures height from the street, that's where the height's measured from. So, that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I agree with the stuff that we're talking about here. I'll just remind, not you, because you already remember, so does Greg, but some of our biggest challenges over the years have been this daylighting issue, and they've been sort of driven by existing zoning, right? So this is kind of our chance to reflect some of those things that we maybe learned and wish had been a little different at the time. And I love the description of daylighting. That's really what we're talking about, trying to not create the house and up.
Were we talking about the design guidelines in this section or no?
Oh, we should add one, right? Let's talk about design guideline.
Well, I couldn't remember where
I missed it,
in
so.
the presentation. But I was thinking that, because it says new buildings only, right, for Fairview 1, and I'm wondering if we wouldn't want to actually apply it to, say, if somebody's renovating a substantial part of their facade, that you reach a certain point where you maybe say 50% if it's being affected, that you want to say, okay, now you've kind of crossed into, I want you to follow the design guidelines.
Only in F1, Mike?
Yeah, it's only an F1.
Okay. So major remodels in F1?
Yeah.
Don't the guidelines currently have some parameters around when they apply and when they don't?
Yes, so with remodels in the downtown, there's certain triggers, so it's, you have to be applicable for, a permit's required. So if you're painting it, we're not going to require you to come through. So that's the first trigger, is if a permit's required. Then it's changing window or door openings, so you're changing sort of the facade, or windows getting bigger or smaller, being removed. A change in roof structure, so maybe going from a gable to a hip, or a gable to a flat roof, or a change in height. I believe those are the triggers.
Yeah.
You're not changing building materials.
And changing building materials as well.
So just to be clear, great explanation of what's required downtown. This was, for discussion purposes, purposely less restrictive, right? We're
Yeah.
proposing that it doesn't do what Stan just said, that it's only for new buildings.
I'm okay with being less restrictive, but I still think that there's a point at which you've crossed the line and we ought to be following it.
So you're saying major remodels for this?
However we want to define it, whether it's something similar to what's currently downtown or something different.
I don't think I'd want to be as restrictive as downtown. Just changing window or door openings or roofs or things like that, to me, would not, in my opinion, be enough to trigger it. But I can see what he's saying, like if you're renovating the facade, 80% of the facade of a building, well, yeah, at this point, you're not really using the existing structure anymore. So I don't know what that would look like, but I understand what you're saying.
I can see somebody deciding to leave the facade in place and building crazy things like that.
Yeah.
Things we architects do to get around, requirements.
We definitely,
Yeah.
could you, between now and whenever we meet again, drag out the minutes associated with some of that the trigger conversations with the current
For
design
sure.
guidelines? That was,
We're doing this because Commissioner Culvaney's here tonight, so that's why we're having this discussion.
well, there was a lot of round and round, and that was,
Yeah.
my inclination at this point is I'm still focused more on less restrictive than on conformance.
Yeah.
But I want to refresh myself a little bit to those previous conversations. Chris?
Yeah, I think I would just add to that. I think, I agree, less restrictive. I guess I just am curious if the downtown guidelines are really something we can apply to this. I mean, the downtown has many buildings, if I remember, and I do remember that guidelines conversation, because candidly, it was the first discussion that I was a part of on the council. So at that time, I was reading everything. But I feel like the number of buildings and the investment in the area, it's sort of, the guidelines point to similar colors and similar style of the buildings, and we have an area of Fairview that doesn't have a whole lot. So I guess I just wonder if it's an applicable document. Certainly, I assume some of the intent of it is good, but I would be worried to tie it to the downtown guidelines, because I think it potentially could be, and potentially we may want it to be something a bit different. Not to say that it's going to be crazy. I don't know. I'm a little concerned with saying the downtown guidelines should apply on this. And I appreciate the effort that it's new buildings only, but in some ways I feel like that may add to some of the mismatch or the lack of, I don't want to say conformity, because I know that's not what we're looking for here, but
You don't want to detract from an eclectic look.
yeah, that for sure. That for sure. Yeah, I guess I'll just say, I'm not sure they apply to that. It's the same thing, so.
See, and I think I would go a little bit in the opposite direction. The eclecticness might be a little much right now. I think I'd like a little more cohesion. I'm not necessarily saying that the downtown guidelines are where we need to be, but it'd be nice if it, was a little more cohesive. I'll stick with that word.
So it sounds like, jump in here. If we're looking for further discussions at the next meeting with maybe a little more meat on the bones in the staff presentation, it looks like we've come across our first one, right?
Yeah.
The applicability of design guidelines is next time we meet, maybe?
Yeah,
That way Stan and Jason and Flora and Emily can do their thing.
that's great.
Okay.
I like it.
Yep.
Doesn't need to be decided. Hold everything else up.
That too. Parking. Let's move on to parking. Thoughts on parking? None? Greg?
Yeah. I mean, I get where we're going with it. I want to tap the brakes slightly, because I'm getting pretty familiar with overflow from Goldfinger when they've got big events, which is great when it's just one business doing it. But it gets a little different if we're going to see more and more developments like that in the area. Rogers gets to be kind of tough anyway when you've got traffic going in both directions and a lot of people parked along the south side of it. The conflicts become pretty strong. So I'm just thinking next to the residential neighborhoods, it could get a little crazy. I want us to be mindful of that moving forward.
So I wrote down F2 because I heard you talking about F2, but are you more concerned, not so much with F2, but parking requirements when it's adjacent to a residential neighborhood?
Yeah. That's really my concern. It's one thing when it's the occasional spillover into 6, 7, 8, 9 blocks of the neighborhood. It's another thing when if it's something that could happen day after day after day after day.
Other thoughts?
Everybody else okay with the concepts?
Yeah, the adjacency thing, I think, is really kind of where a lot of our sorting is going to have to end up, right? Because we know that's the biggest issue, and so parking's definitely one of them. But that adjacency thing is a challenge. We've talked in previous meetings about people's expectations about moving into a neighborhood, and to some degree, we got to figure out a way to respect those and still get more permissive.
So Mayor, are you saying?
Yeah, I
Agree
think
with
that's
Craig's
a concern. I don't have a solution to tell you to try and put into a table, but I think those adjacency issues, whether it's parking or it's density or it's height or it's setbacks, are all going to be kind of the thing that keeps rearing its head here.
So some of that's going to play its way out with the uses.
Absolutely.
Because there'll be a lot of uses that you could put in there that aren't gonna have those events. And then you can look at the conversation we had a month ago over by O'Neill with between the Y and the junior high. All the parking that spills into the streets pretty much every month. Happens all the time. And I guess some of it is going back to expectations. If you're living in that neighborhood and you've got those institutions, or you're in a place where there's going to be commercial establishments of that nature, then to some degree your expectations are managed.
Right, the expectations can change over time as residents turn over, as
Right.
businesses turn over.
Right.
It's just something to, and I'm not saying we should necessarily change the
No.
parking requirements that are proposed.
Right.
but
A lot of it's
something
going to
to
be,
mindful
a lot of it's going to, of course, I think more of it's going to be driven by the use than the parking requirements.
Absolutely.
And farther down the road in this thing, it also might start to inform what we do with our spaces. It's another thing. Maybe, maybe that's the infrastructure that helps the whole thing.
Right.
So what I'm interpreting, and anybody in staff jump in if we're hearing it wrong, is that we can, once you tell us to go from framework to zoning, we're good at using this as the basis. Doesn't mean we're locked into it, it just means
Yes.
keep going down this route. Okay?
Yep.
With the parking regs that are out there?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Build 2. So most of the conversation on the board was focused on the front side of stuff. Chris is dying. Jump
I'm
in.
not dying. I do have a question. I just need some clarity. The one you showed with the outdoor kind of under the roof, would that also be allowed to have a 30-foot non roofed space? I don't
Yes.
know how to say. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the way we went back, and this question came up in some of our
Yeah.
discussions. So we went back to look at it, and it really talks about the building facade.
Yeah.
So because there's this facade here, that in essence creates your street wall. Whereas if you go back, to the example B here, is there's not a street wall
Yeah.
adjacent to the sidewalk. So that's why this came up, and when we looked at it, we're like,
Yeah.
if this came in, we would approve this today.
But you could you also add an indent of 30 feet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could indent this and do a little block.
Got it.
Here.
Okay.
Yep.
And then going back to the 3 different modes, I mean, 30 versus 50 to me, I'm not sure I have a strong opinion either way. I guess I would have a question on those that maybe are closer to this. Like, is the courtyard model something that is still popular, viable, beneficial? That's a legitimate question, not, I don't have a feeling either way. But I don't know, I guess, have we had many requests for that? Are there like maybe a use case or advantage to that?
So these weren't all just like courtyards, right? Like this could theoretically also be, we said like an open air type patio space.
Correct,
or
it could be an
things like
outdoor
that.
dining space.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
referring to this courtyard because it goes deeper
Right,
than it is
right.
wider,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah.
So C, I guess maybe a better way.
Yeah,
to
I
put
mean,
it.
isn't this something where we really want to allow maximum flexibility?
Yes.
So that
That's-
whatever the
Right.
That's
person
what I was
coming into
thinking.
the space thinks is going to be most successful.
That's where I'm
Talk
at.
about not detracting from the
Yeah.
eclecticism. I think
Yeah.
we want to be as flexible here as possible, because somebody really wants to carve out open space.
Yeah,
What's wrong with that? And if they think that's the most
Yeah.
as long as it's gonna
viable
be an
use.
activated.
Correct.
Yeah.
space, yeah.
That that's the most viable use of the space. I think it's going to add interest and diversity and all kinds of cool
This is
stuff.
why I'm
I agree.
hoping the Stan and Jason crew will jump in though, because the way I'm hearing that is that if we do maximum flexibility and openness is okay, then the more flexible you go, are we requiring the build to zone anymore?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying get rid of it altogether, but I think we should. I mean, obviously, you did these 3 examples for illustration purposes, but I mean, pick whatever maximum you have to. But in terms of how it's configured, is
Yes,
that's what I'm saying.
yes.
Got it.
That's the flexibility. Not,
I
not-
agree.
Not the volume, but the configuration.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to play with that idea a little bit more, though, what Dave brought up just now, is why even have the build to zone? Doesn't the highest and best use of these properties dictate that they want to make the most use of that, I don't know how much we need to encourage people to build.
Well, right.
Is what I'm getting to.
It's like gravity.
Well, Yeah, except that we wouldn't probably be happy if they didn't. You're probably right. So most likely want to make as much value out of, get as much value out of the square footage of property that they own. But if somebody came in there and didn't want to, would we be okay with, picture a street wall? Would we be okay with one guy in the middle, back 30 feet off of the built? We probably wouldn't be.
Right.
Not in that.
I think that's
not
the-
this environment, no.
Yeah, but so the answer to your question is probably they're not going to, but do we want to regulate in such a way to prevent them?
I think the configuration should allow for max flexibility, but you ought to have some limit on how
Yes.
much carve out you have. Like whether it's a circle, a star, a square, a triangle, a trapezoid, who cares?
Yeah.
Right, but I agree completely with Martin,
I do
and
too.
I'm thinking that A, B, and C are all
Get that on
fine
tape.
in terms of the configuration. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the other flexibility could come in. Right now in the
2017
F1, it's a 0 to 5. So if there was that desire to push it back, you could go 0 to 10, like the F2. I mean, that's the other option too, is to make that a little bit more depth if you wanted that building not to be right at the property line. We could look at that too, to do 0 to 10 of both the F1,
I'd be
F2.
agreeable to that.
So I'll jump in. Stan, Jason Enza, who going to write this ordinance if we get that far. Do you guys have enough direction on that from what the council just said?
Yes.
Is everybody okay with the 0 to 10 as opposed to 0 to 5?
I like 0 to 5.
I
In
think
F1, I like
too.
0 to 5.
Yeah.
0 to 5 as well.
I'm good with 0 to 10 still.
Let's make it 0 to 5, and you can ask for the other 5.
There you go.
What about, when we've come up with these, just for this purpose, were the numbers 50 and 30, were those tied? Were those like a percentage of the face, or were those a percentages of the area, or what were those, where'd those come from?
This was just us throwing a couple options out there,
Okay.
so we haven't really explored it much more than saying, all right, 30 feet, 33%. So I think we'd have to do a maximum, because obviously we don't
Yeah.
Yeah.
want to skirt around some of the build-to zone areas. I think going forward, we would have to figure out, on a 100-foot wide lot, does that flexible area become a square footage? To say, okay, you can do 30 by 50 deep, which is 1,500 if I'm right, and you can do 1,500 in the front. So I think we would have to try to play around with some of the dimensions and the trapezoids and the hexagons and all those unique spaces, but the rectangles and what we want to sort of carve out.
My sense, the reason I ask is my sense right now of this is that I'm less concerned with the square footage and more concerned with the percent of the
Okay.
face,
All right.
because the whole point here is the street wall premise. So I wouldn't want somebody taking their 1,500 square feet and having it run almost all the way along the front of the building.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, with our current code, it is a percentage of the facade or
Okay.
35 feet as the max.
Gotcha,
So
Yeah.
okay.
That's what, you base something off that.
That would do it.
Okay.
So I'll ask again, same staff, are you guys good?
I think we are, yeah.
Anything else on build 2?
No, other than thank you very much for the three-dimensional renderings, because they had the desired effect of driving a lot of these conversations. It's one thing to see the stuff flat, but recall when we did this, the downtown years ago, once everybody saw the three-dimensional, whoa!
And I'm looking forward to the star-shaped cutout at the next meeting. That'll be great.
The Commissioner told
5 points.
Yeah, yeah.
5
The
points and
telling-
6 points, which one?
You pick, you pick.
All right, what about land uses?
So land uses would be everything at the table, plus if we are on the same page with home ox and residential accessories.
Let's go
Okay.
through these first.
Yeah. Oh, all right, go ahead. I'm
Well,
jumping
no,
ahead.
let's treat this as 3 sections, right? There's the residential use, the home occupational uses, and then there's the table of uses. So as we look at the residential uses, accessory structures, the takeaway was the next slide, right? So that you guys are going to try, this is sort of where staff thinks they heard us. Does that fit with the majority of the people sitting here?
I like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the extended family unit concept is correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, and then the home occupation portion, this again is what we think we said.
Home
I'm
ox,
seeing mostly
okay.
head nods.
We
Yes.
said we think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We said we think.
This was like 46 houses, right?
Yes, I believe we counted around 40, 46 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had a question about this. And this takes us to the table probably, but we say no retail, restaurant, et cetera. I had two questions just to aggravate everybody. Because that's kind of why we're here. No, because this is sort of a check down, right? And what we thought, and do we want to take the next step towards an ordinance? I had two questions. One was, how would we feel about somebody using their garage right now, in this scenario, could, like, say, as a tax returner, or for an accountant, could have an occasional visitor, right? And I think we're saying we think that's okay. What would we feel about somebody who was running like a bakery out of there? How would we treat that? That's a whole industry of really almost to-order stuff, right? We're not talking about a busy bee
You're not
replacement.
talking about sit down there, you're talking about food to go.
Right.
Retail or?
Right. Well, that's the question, right? Is it?
It's not retail. I'm not
Right. Yeah.
Food to go.
That's health code.
But the issue, it's health code from that standpoint, but the issue we were talking about was the idea of parking. Does it require parking? What's the impact on neighbors of people coming and going? And so I think when we were talking about this before, we were generally thinking about, more professional service kinds of folks who wouldn't necessarily have a flow of people coming and going. Just asking the question because this is the time to talk about it.
Yeah, so I guess the question I have is, with the county health department requirements, how viable is that going to be if someone's going to put a bakery in their garage with all the plumbing and other requirements that you're going to have?
And be able to accommodate more people
Right.
than like a tax prep person would, right? Like, that's time consuming.
Would we, if they were able to figure it out and wanted to spend the money, what would we say about it? That's the question.
So I think it's feasible that somebody would take their primary house kitchen and modify it to county health department standard. I think it's in the realm of feasibility.
I'm looking at L, not the garage.
So
Yeah, but either, okay, I said garage, but maybe it's the other way.
Sure.
Do we care? I mean, maybe we don't care. I just wanted to sort of double check it.
I would, I would be okay with that. Realistically, if you're talking about that, it's not gonna be like 46 houses, it's gonna be one, maybe two. And at that point, again, I don't think you're gonna get a volume when you think about those types of things that's gonna be any more than a tax prep person or somebody who's offering
Yeah.
a service. I mean,
So probably a better
Way
example would be a
more intensive.
catering business, which
Correct.
I wouldn't have a problem with because they're doing their prep and then they're just taking their
Taking it
stuff
out.
and going somewhere. They're not having people coming in and out all day.
Right.
but if you're doing something to order, that's a labor-intensive business, right? And you're not gonna be having 15
No, right.
people coming in and out of the day. So I'm fine with it personally, but.
Greg, you look like you were going to say something. No?
Willing to think about it. The
Okay.
catering piece makes sense. The two-order, I'm a little less certain. 'Cause I'm not convinced that the flow of traffic would be as low as Leslie is.
So I suppose it would be hard to craft an ordinance that would distinguish between I'm picking up food versus I'm picking up my catering order.
Right.
Yeah.
Could this be something that was allowed, similar to what we do with special uses, where individual, so thinking of our tire stores, things like that, where we,
So this category of home lock would be a special use?
so, I mean, is there, in order to allow for more flexibility, so that thing gets proposed, and we can then explore the impact of that a little deeper.
Maybe not.
No?
The special use isn't
Am I kidding?
as restrictive as we
Yeah. Your ears getting hot? Yeah.
Let's ask the person who's writing that
But
ordinance.
so the other thing I wonder about is just the allowable size of, or the number of employees. Because you're, especially like when you're thinking about that,
That's a good
you're
point.
gonna vastly limit the amount that somebody can produce if you're only allowing, say, 2 or 3 people to be on site at any given time. So that might be one way that we can kind of get to some of our issues.
And then there's the whole, how much are we gonna really police this, right? I mean,
Well, that's.
what's our
Yeah.
enforcement
My complaint.
capability?
When you smell the scones
That leads me more
baking.
toward no, to be honest,
Right?
so.
But how do we know if it's that or Pepperidge Farm?
Oh, it's going- Stealth making.
Well, I'm still, of the mindset that I'm trying to get more progressive.
Yeah,
And so
I
that's
agree.
where I'm landing on it, but I just wanted to add that to the conversation, because when we talked before, we were really sort of focused on a different type of business in these spaces. So just something to think about.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I guess I'm more permissive for 1 and 2, but I'm less so in 3.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I land.
Well, this is already more permissive than what's currently
Correct.
allowed.
Yep.
So there could be an argument to be made for, let's do this and see how it goes.
What are you guys hearing?
Help, Stan. What are we hearing?
We're hearing we have a little bit of work to do on this. I think it comes down to Commissioner Stussy. If you had said, if we limit the number of employees, we're probably good that way, because then that would limit your ability to have a big commercial kitchen and have a bakery there. I do know that caterers are, I believe it, we'd have to check the ordinance to see how they would, if there's a different use categorization versus a bakery, which is more retail, more walking in and out and stuff that way. I think it's just going to be, I think this section is a challenge just based on the uses and where, size-wise and stuff. I think also if we limit the size to 1,000 square feet, Commissioner Deppner, you could help me out, like typical kitchen. What size is a typical residential kitchen? I know they're not really typical, but
They're eclectic.
Yeah, say a
Yeah.
couple hundred square feet.
a couple hundred square feet. So I mean, you could probably get a pretty good sized kitchen in there for 1,000 square feet. So then if you only have one spouses and one employee, how much are you really producing?
You can crank out a lot. If you had 2
Yeah.
employees and you set yourself up, you could crank out a lot.
Yeah. So
So that was very helpful, Stan. What I just did, what you couldn't see because we were just in the council, is I'm proposing that this is discussion issue number 2 for our next round, a little bit more meat on the bones, or are we good to go?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear more about thoughts after you guys have listened to us, how you might suggest trying to,
Yeah.
with people's concerns,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
you might suggest trying to constrain that a little.
Before we leave land uses, can I just put a stake in the ground that in F1 and F2, we do not become more permissive with respect to personal improvement services?
Oh, yeah, before we go there, just to Commissioner.
We haven't
Cook's
left
point,
that yet. We're
I
still
was
coming to
thinking
the
just the
table.
home occ issue. I don't think we
Yeah.
can.
All right.
Yeah, we're still coming back to that.
On the home occ issue, I mean, are there examples? I mean, is this already going on in town? And, you know, I
Sure.
mean, it might be,
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. And
That's why I think it's a real possibility.
Well, yeah, so my point is, I mean, we're not, you know, if
Danny's
we're
got
not
his
getting a
trouble.
bunch of complaints about that, and these things are already happening, what are we worried about here?
I think the challenge is just identifying the business that we're not thinking
Always on a
of.
cake lady.
You know, there's gonna, you know, a caterer is a great example of something that sounds like a nice little mom and pop operation until that caterer has a commercial
Is
kitchen
busy.
down the street that
Right.
he or she is pumping out stuff and bringing to the house because it's a cheaper space to run out of. Yeah, but I struggle too, and this, I think it is important to have a little deeper dive, because I think of retail in a lot of different ways. Someone who does custom wedding invitations, no problem. Is that retail? I don't know. I think it is technically. So I'm struggling to pinpoint where the line is, as
Yeah.
it seems like we all are.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same place.
The idea of being less restrictive suddenly doesn't feel as comfortable in this discussion as it did
Yeah.
in the other two, that's for
Right.
sure. So I think a little more thought, and maybe staff can try to hone in a little bit more on that. That would be helpful.
If that's the will of the council, when
Yeah.
we come back, we'll talk a little bit about design guidelines, and we'll talk a little bit more about some home occupancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to talk about the table.
Sorry, I
And
jumped the
Martin
gun.
really would like to talk about the table, so he's got to stake the plant.
Yes.
What do you got?
So F1 and F2, we're proposing to be more permissive by allowing certain things as a right. Under personal improvement services, I would like to stick to what we have in the downtown.
So, personal
improvement services.
improvement.
Personal improvement services, there's a number of listed categories, and there
Yeah,
are,
me to that, too.
there are things we're allowing in we're proposing to allow in F1 and F2 as permitted that are not currently allowed in the downtown.
So make it like the downtown.
Match the downtown. I'm just going to leave it there.
Do you want to, so similarly, if we're not talking about height, we're talking about F1 is really sort of our downtown core minus the height because the downtown core is lower. But are you thinking that these general health fitness studios instructional go into F3 or just F1 and F2?
No, well, I'm sorry, that's a fair clarification. No, I wasn't proposing that we change F3. That's why I only
Okay.
limited my comments to F1 and F2.
Right.
It's just I would have F1 and F2 pretty much match what's in DC, DB, and DT.
Okay.
So we had a second on that from Commissioner Davenport.
Please.
Yeah, I'll go along.
Greg,
Yeah, that's fair.
okay.
Yep.
Anybody object to that? Danny's in. Looks like
I don't think so.
You win?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Mark.
We don't want to, honestly, if we're going to talk about things being artist-focused, I feel like tattoo and body piercing goes along with that, but I'm going to be the losing battle here. To me, that's another art form, but
Don't disagree with you, but I was trying to be consistent. Like one particular one opinion.
So we heard,
but I mean, to me, that is a form, that is an art form, right? So,
Yep.
yeah.
so the idea on the table was
I don't disagree with you.
the whole category, and then Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit just proposed to bring this line up
That's not the one I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
and keep the tattoo and body piercing establishments as permitted.
I'm fine with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I guess I'm making sure I understand. Say that again, Dave, sorry.
So when Commissioner Tully said
Yep.
personal improvement, like,
Match
we
all
read
of
that
those.
as all of these subpoints.
Yeah.
I was just trying to address it as a block, but
Sure.
I'm fine with that adjustment.
But then
Yeah.
when Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit said, hey, what
Yeah.
about this category? I'm
Yeah.
just saying, look, we could take
Yes.
this direction from here up
Fine.
Yeah, agreed.
and leave this
I'm
That's
good with
fine.
line. But I haven't heard, we haven't heard
It's
enough
kinda-
yet. We've heard a couple folks so
Yeah, I
far.
think there's some head nodding in that direction.
good?
Martin's saying fine, I'm saying
I'm fine.
fine.
Okay. Leave
Yep.
tattoo as,
Not a losing battle.
Yeah, look at that.
So Martin, were you done?
Yes.
Okay. The special use for bed and breakfast in F3, I feel like is a little bit of a can of worms as
I
it
agree.
pertains to VRBOs and Airbnbs. I understand it's a special use, so we'll have some control over that. But
But it's already a special use in downtown, right? So
yeah.
I'm comfortable keeping it.
Okay.
I'm all right with it. I've got a couple of other ones.
everybody good? Everybody good about?
Everybody okay with leaving?
Wraps it up, Jim.
Is everybody all right with leaving that?
All right, so this was no change.
Hold on one second.
Is
Sorry.
everybody okay with leaving that? I mean, that is a can of worms, and remember, special use is not really,
Yeah.
it's not, so I mean,
I'd push back on that a
I
little
think
bit.
downtown is a little different than a residential house.
and
It's a losing battle.
well, I have a question though, but could you maybe not be this moment, but give us a little more commentary on whether there's any opportunity to effectively control some of that through the parking related stuff? Parking related issues? And then there's, right, if it's being used that way, ostensibly it's owner occupied, and then you'd have parking challenges.
Then does a bed and breakfast have are they subject to the same health codes and in terms of kitchens and all the things we just talked about with the home occupation?
I believe
think they would be, yeah.
require a county health department.
Let's check that.
Yep, we'll double check, but I do believe so.
Yeah.
So this one, we're hearing a little bit of question. We have the idea of bed and breakfast in the F3 as proposed as special use. A couple council members questioning that, and then following that lead, if we added parking requirements to that particular use, would that be enough control? it would change the feel of that property for sure, right? Because it would be an on-site parking requirement.
We do have a definition of the zoning code for bed and breakfast. Would that help play off of that? 'Cause I think
Please.
It's important in this
Yeah.
discussion. So bed and breakfast in the zoning ordinance is an owner-occupied private residence that offers sleeping accommodations to guests for rents in the owner's principal residence. Food may only be served to overnight guests of the bed and breakfast establishments. Since there's zoning ordinance.
Doesn't require the owner to stay that night, does it?
Yeah, it just says owner-occupied private residence.
Thank you for that.
You couldn't enforce that anyway.
You just
All right.
allow it, your point is well taken.
Yeah.
Other table-related comments? Greg, I thought you said you had some.
Yeah, Dave, could you flip to the page that's got the nursing home on it? Yep. First off, I guess, could you define for me sheltered care?
So it's defined through the state ordinances as sheltered care. And so that's typically some sort of assisted sort of living or arrangement there where there's somebody there providing care and services to those people.
Stan, do we have one of those in town?
The supportive living facility up in
Ogden.
on Lacey Road,
Lacey.
north of Ogden, is a sheltered care facility.
Yeah, I'm not wild about it in either one of F3 or F2, but I think it's a better fit in 2 than it is in 3.
So you want to remove it from F1?
Remove it from
3.
Oh, sorry, remove from 3?
You know, the group home piece, I think, is an easier fit with the occupancy max. And I'm just thinking about, particularly in 3, thinking about additional, potential for ambulance traffic and things like that starts to get a little more impactful.
Is it just the sheltered care, not the nursing home portion, just the sheltered care?
I'd like to remove it out of both, for
Shelter care,
F3 in
nursing home.
particular.
Shelter care and nursing home, right?
Yeah, ideally, I'd like to remove it out of both, but I'm willing to be flexible on it.
We see F3, up until this point, most of the conversation on F3 has been largely that it's, I'm overstating it, but traditional residential, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's R4-ish. And so, I guess to Greg's point, that's a dramatic difference.
Yeah.
A facility like, if you think about the slip up off of Lacey, that is nothing like an R4. So I'm feeling a lot like Greg, I think, at this point.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, everybody's in on this?
And that was only okay because it was a lot better than what was there before.
So,
Yeah.
what about
The
F2?
construction company's quite a bit.
F2,
more
I think,
impactful.
I'm comfortable
I'm more
with
agreeing,
that.
I'm okay with keeping it at F2.
Yeah, I was focused on F3.
So I just
Yeah.
make sure I follow this. The council is supportive of the concept Greg raised and Enzo clarified, and the F3 only. Council's in on this. This is a
Remove
change,
from
right?
F3, yes.
Yeah, that's a change that council supports in the F3. Okay.
Other table-related stuff?
Could we go to the trade school piece? What is the broader definition of trade school? Give me 1 second.
So it does come, there's a wide range of schools that can be in there. We'll get you the definition though. So I know there's a cosmetology school already in that, on Burlington, just north of the Fairview train station there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there could be some heavier industrial things that fall into that. Cosmetology is one thing. And I think it's a departure from sort of the artisanal, industry that we've been thinking of, potentially, depending on exactly.
Greg, is your concern that a trade school will become industrial in terms of its impact on the neighborhood?
Correct.
Maybe especially,
Correct.
Yeah, we can do
That
special
might
use.
work.
that's what it is in the downtown, then you'd be able to check
You'd have,
the impact on the neighborhood.
yeah, and wouldn't you have built-in kind of constraints on the lot usage. I mean, I'm thinking, Greg, like, you know, you wouldn't want it to have a backyard full of poles, right, as an example. But you really wouldn't, that really couldn't happen with some of the other drivers, right?
Correct.
Couldn't
yeah.
take an F1 site and only cover a third of it and put a bunch of utility poles in the backyard.
Well, you'd have to build to the build-to zone in the front, but then there's nothing in the back that says you couldn't have an
Oh.
open yard
Okay.
or something.
Yes,
If you're
that's a,
operating outside.
Outside, if they're operating outside, then there's certain other noise and
Yeah.
other restrictions like that that can come into play.
Steve, can I ask, what does current zoning allow right now?
Trade school specialists.
So currently in the downtown business, downtown courts, and special
No,
use.
I'm talking about currently in the current F1, F2 areas, their current zoning
Oh.
right now.
Oh,
Isn't this
gotcha.
already a permitted use? And
So the trade school-
Making a special use, aren't we getting more restrictive than what's currently allowed?
Yeah, so we have a lot of
Industrial,
B,
yes.
we have some B2 and B3 in here. So that is a permitted use in the B2 and B3 zoning district, one B1 that's some existing in zoning in
So
there.
it's
So it's
going
all-
to, it's going to depend on what part of the Fairview area, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and
So it's
then-
already going on there, though, it's already,
It already went in by right, is your point,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And in manufacturing districts, their special uses now are permitted in the B1, B2, B3.
To Mike's point, though, obviously, there's already a cosmetology school there, and that's not necessarily what I'm aiming at. Are there other trade schools in the F1, F2 districts? Because if there are, then I think Mike's got a valid point. If there aren't, then...
Well, but they'd be grandfathered in. It's no different than Lang's Auto in the middle
Sure.
of downtown. That wouldn't be allowed today.
Sure.
They can continue to operate.
If you read
Nobody's
that.
kicking anybody out.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jason's got,
Who's excited to have another zoning definition recommended? All right, so trade school, uses in an enclosed building that focus on teaching the skills needed to perform a particular job. Examples include schools of cosmetology, modeling academies, computer training facilities, vocational schools, administrative business training facilities, and similar uses. Truck driving schools are classified as trucking and transportation terminals, otherwise wholesale distribution and storage use category.
Keyword there is enclosed, right?
Enclosed,
Yeah.
correct.
so,
Okay.
so what limits to you could, yeah, okay, but you could have some pretty, so think back,
Welding.
yeah, I mean, think back to
Exactly what I was-
second floor residential
Arc welding.
Oh,
in a neighboring building. You could have, there are some activities that would be part of some trade schools that I think you'd want to find some way to prevent them from going on in that area.
Yeah, most of that definition I'm totally fine with.
Yeah,
There-
right, but
There's some
there's,
squish in there. that-
yeah.
What's the definition of squish? Can you look that up?
Merriam-Webster, right? We don't have to-
so the direction I'm hearing you potentially is if we were to tweak the definition of trade school to make sure that it's not an industrial
I think
type.
so.
And that's what you're getting
Yeah.
at, right? Council's
really what-
cool with that?
I
Yeah.
will just add, I'm not interested in seeing that in F1.
Yeah, so
That's
first,
me.
we'll go with the
Mhm.
concepts.
I think the other part of it is, what do we want to see there?
Right.
Rather than,
Mhm.
I'm not interested in kicking anybody out either, but aren't we here to make sure that what the future state is what we're looking for? And I just don't think F1 is a great, I feel there is better opportunity in F2 and for F2
Right.
for that.
So-
F1 and F1.
Yeah, I agree, and that's
Yeah.
exactly what we did with the downtown. There were all kinds of industrial uses
Yeah.
in the downtown, and we didn't run anybody out, but
Yeah.
changed it over the time by
Sure.
transforming to what
Yeah.
the future, the vision of the future.
Yeah.
So just make sure I'm following. The concept of trade school as permitted in the F2, as long as it's not an industrial impact,
Yeah.
thumbs up all around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, F2. And then the question was put on the table, do we want to allow that in F1?
See, I'm not sure, this is a split hairs thing that I don't have an answer to, but I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm sitting here witnessing one in each right now.
One in each, one in one and one in two.
Vocational trade school in both downtown and in Fairview,
Oh.
as it sits today. You know, it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer yet,
Well,
but
and
it's a good question.
Well, and in some cases, though, the trade schools also provide opportunity for people to have the hands-on training and is still providing a service of which would probably be allowed in that district. So I'm okay
Yeah, right.
keeping it in F1.
What
You
if
know,
that's the limitation then? That
And
it's
yeah, I don't know if that
training
can
for
be
a
written
service
in,
that would be
but
allowed
that
in
would
that
be
That's a
great.
good way of looking at it, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, that could work.
I mean, because I know when I was in college, I went to an Aveda training school because it was a cheap haircut, but it still felt fancy because it was Aveda, right? There is a bonus to that, right, when you're young and starting off.
So the concept I'm hearing is F1 trade schools have to be open to for public
We're
service.
slicing the garlic pretty thin right now.
Yep, we are, but that's okay, that's all right, because it's just a little framework for us to help us out, right?
Looking exactly right.
F1 trade
We'll end
schools.
up looking exactly.
Only on Tuesdays.
Odd number, Tuesday.
Open to public for service. Okay.
But what about the concept of it being, could you limit the schools to only the services that would be allowed in F1? So, auto mechanics, like we're not allowing.
Right.
Right.
I get the concept.
Okay.
I get it. Because
Yeah.
then it would tie it to the impacts of the rest of the district.
Right.
That's the
I'm
concept, right?
comfortable with that.
It actually might be an easier way to define
It would be,
Yes.
it would be actually.
But I think staff is picking up on the
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
That started when Greg said, don't let the trade school be more impactful than the underlying zoning. That's
Right.
the concept now, right?
Correct.
Absolutely.
And this isn't going to be a zoning code next week either. So,
Yeah.
other table-related stuff. All right, I have a question. You can help me find it. There was a place where we sort of, in the typical uses, I think, we kind of make a note about ruling out like contractor offices. There we are. Building service, and we threw up typical uses of contractor office. If it's a contractor office, I'm focusing on office, not storage yard, how is that materially different than, scroll down, then, scroll down some more, then, back up.
Corporate office.
Then a corporate office, a therapist, a counselor, an architect, an attorney. I mean, it's at that point, it's just an office, right? So I'm questioning that a little bit. It might be my understanding of definitions, but it seems like if it's, we're not talking about a storage yard, we're not talking about storing trucks and stuff, but if it's truly an office, do we care what business is in the office? And I don't know how that sorts out with the definition of building service. Maybe we need Jason to read some more.
Let's read the definition, business services.
Fine, right, I'm almost there.
Business
Should I start with building service?
Building service.
Building service, yes.
Okay. You all ready?
Right.
Building service, uses that provide maintenance and repair services for all structural and mechanical elements of structures, as well as the exterior spaces of a premise. Typical uses include contractor offices, janitorial, landscape maintenance, extermination, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, window cleaning, and similar services.
There's a whole business industry that is, has offices and sales teams, and that's the services they provide. That's not necessarily where their trucks and equipment are. So I don't know if we're really ruling them out here, or if we're only sort of ruling them out, or how this shakes up. It just jumped off the page.
Yeah. I think some of the times what we see is the contractor office might have where I'm able to drive a work truck home, and then I come to the office with the work truck. So it might feel more impactful as opposed to driving the Honda CR-V or the Hyundai Elantra to the office. And so it might feel like it's more of an impact.
Do we really need to, do we really need to make this distinction? Because if it's your situation, Mayor, where it's the cement company, but their sales team has a sales office. They're not driving in the mixer trucks. It's the sales office. They're going to call it an office.
Yeah.
Now you have to deal with the
Yeah.
contractor part.
Maybe so. That's why I was asking the question, because of the typical use note.
Right.
But now that I hear the definition, I think of a plumber. And their office is their place where they park their trucks and their logoed vans and things like that. And
But that would be a plumbing business.
But that's a plumber.
yeah, but it's still also their office as well. it's not like, I'm not sure how you,
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
that's
not sure
what
how
that's
you-
what I'm getting at, is
how
I
you
think maybe we'll
police
leave
it.
that one alone, because it's working just fine, let's not try to mess with it.
yeah,
because
I
think
think I
contractors.
tend to agree. I think I'm a little concerned about the contractor office
Yeah, fine.
because I do feel like
I think
it's
I kinda just leave
more
it.
than that, so.
Yeah.
I vote we leave it.
Yeah.
And we do differentiate currently. When
Yes,
someone- So when
right.
someone calls in and it's Joe's Concrete Company.
You can tell an
but
orange
it's
from a
really-
pineapple, you don't need.
But it's in a high-rise building, and they say it's really just our sales staff or our
Yeah.
IT support staff, but it's Joe's Concrete Company, then we classify it as an office because there's not gonna be the concrete trucks, there's not gonna
Right.
be
Right.
that other
Okay.
ancillary type stuff.
Does that work for you, Mayor?
Yeah, that works for me.
It does, probably, just to complicate things, it might, some wording to what Jason read might make some sense. Some added wording.
Which I think speaks to the council direction to just leave it as is, as proposed, right? Because I-
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yep.
Who's this talking about?
It's only fair you have someone behind you. too.
It's way better to have the manager than the attorney.
Take
You do
the
not want the attorney
spotlight off
behind
the
you.
language, Mayor.
Yeah, maybe it's a losing battle. I'm okay with that. It's, if that's the way we're dealing with it in practice, that's fine. I want to make sure that we're
I
not.
don't think there's any army on the field, there's no battle.
Any other table stuff? Okay, and we're coming back to design guidelines later, right?
Yeah, so I think we heard, I put check marks where we heard concurrence, and we got direction. So I'm gonna put a check mark by land uses. And I think the things we're coming back for future discussion are design guideline applicability and some more work on the home occupation stuff.
Mike?
I have something that's not on the list. How about increasing building coverage allowance in the F3? We haven't talked about building coverage limitations at all.
Talk about FAR.
No, not FAR, building coverage. So we have, right now, it's in, like in our R4s, it's
Yep. 32%.
32%.
Are there building coverage things contemplated here, State and Basin?
I don't believe we got down into that granular item, but because the F3 is reading as more of a residential zoning classification, we probably would just go with the standard 32%.
And that's what I think, maybe there we could be a little bit more permissive. Because I run up against that sometimes with the residential use. And if we're letting somebody do something more with their home occupation, we might want to give a little bit more for that.
Increase the
Tie it
building
to
coverage.
that.
Yeah.
That's another limiting factor in what people can do.
Would that be a place where we would want to talk about, at the risk of splitting more garlic? Slicing more garlic, splitting hairs. But we talk, in this area, we've certainly contemplated as residential, but we are trying to allow home office use, yeah, but also duplexes. And if you were trying to find a way to allow a little more residential density without apartment buildings, right? One way to do that might be additional lot coverage if it's a multi-family dwelling.
Sure.
I don't know that I'm, we've already talked about trying to look at ways to limit those home occupation uses so they don't get to be something more than what we want them to be. So I don't know that I'm excited about wanting to expand for that, but the idea that a duplex might get a little more leeway is interesting.
We could come back, we're coming back anyway, right? So we could add a building coverage section for the next discussion
Sure.
in the F3.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so building coverage is the footprint of the structures or anything, I believe it's 18 inches off the ground, so
Right.
that counts. An anchoring patio does not count, a detached garage would, a gazebo would, so that's how it does, and then the footprint of the house. So it's 32% of your lot area.
City of Boulder, Colorado, it's only 20%.
No, so, yeah, I run into even stricter requirements and actually others, there's actually municipalities that don't even have, so it's some lean heavy on FAR.
Yep.
It tends not to be as big of an issue in Downers Grove. For me.
Well, I learned today that we have no building height minimum, which I think is very interesting, that there is no minimum to the building height.
In the zoning
Well,
code.
there
In the
actually,
zoning code.
but in the building code, in order to have an occupiable room, you have to have a 7-foot ceiling.
Yeah.
So, there's that. Could be.
Could be underground.
Excellent. The realtor.
These two guys are dangerous.
Lover's bunker.
So we'll come back next time with 3 discussion points.
What do you got
The zoning
there?
guidelines, home ocs, and building code.
Building covers. All right. Sound good, guys? We have some guests. You guys have listened to this sausage being made. You got any comments we should be thinking about going forward? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a clarification on, this happens to be on Rogers, the R2, where across the street is R3. Does that mean that that's adjacent, so you have to have a setback on the street front, or no?
No.
No, okay. That's all.
Rich?
Yeah, I have a few points. Could we go back to the extended housing units? The graphic that's got, yeah, DE, the back one, the other way. So I'd like to advocate for F, and I don't really understand the difference between D and F, because it's tacked onto the back of the house. It's my understanding that this would be if family members who would have to.
Or F's not.
That's D. F would be, you could rent it out to anybody.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, you could have a larger space on the back of D?
As long as you meet the rest of the code, yeah.
Okay. That was the first thing. The second thing is, it strikes me in Fairview that 1.4 may not handle the real requirements. And the attitude around Main Street multifamily is somebody, or maybe 2 people, are walking to the train, and that has been kind of self-leveling, that, you know, if they had 2 cars, they just wouldn't move into that. They only had 1 spot available. And I don't know with those other apartments on Fairview, particularly the ones that are to the north of Maple, and even the ones to the south, what those parking requirements are, but I think you might be more likely to have 2 commuters. I mean, you could have, and hopefully we will have people walking to the Fairview train station, but I think the farther you get away from downtown and the express trains, the more likelihood you're going to have that you're going to have 2 cars, and you know they need to do that. And then the other thing is with downtown guidelines, and I'd be more impressed if we stuck to the downtown guidelines. And I think the concern that was mentioned was the eclectic nature, and because we're not dictating architectural styles, you know, you look at 4915 Main Street, right across from Toon Funeral Home, totally different architecture than went into that neighborhood, but it still met our guidelines. And I think because we didn't dictate architecture, so you have to have similar architectural styles, I think that gives you the flexibility you need, but still the advantage of having, you know, a defined base, a middle, and a top, you know, with some articulation and you know, more solid building materials. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Janet?
Yeah, I have some concern. 5-story buildings are too high. They just are. And people do not like Maple Avenue. They may not, you might not be hearing complaints, but if you stand at a get-together at church or wherever, people don't like it. It's too high. And parking for these uses, you're gonna have parking out in front of single-family residences all day for your employees, or even 2 or 3 employees plus customers coming in. It's not tenable for a residential use. The idea that it's only gonna happen, there'd be 46 houses, and once you start doing stuff, it's gonna expand. So it's naive to think that what you do here is gonna be limited to this particular area, and you guys are all smarter than that. I'm kind of curious about the public engagement part of all that you built into this, because I cannot imagine that if people object to what you have here, and I do, and you know that in some instances, that you're gonna make any changes. I mean, I don't have any confidence that you're really gonna take into account what people in the neighborhood and in the town want. So I hope that I'm wrong there. Again, just because people don't complain doesn't mean that they're satisfied, or they don't complain to you. And in terms of the uses for commercial uses, I think you need to take into account, somebody at a bakery, what the use will be that would throw off odors for the neighborhood. I don't want to be sitting on my deck and drinking a cocktail and smelling somebody cooking Chinese carryout. So odors associated with some of these uses are an important factor too, I think. And the trade school stuff, I think that some of it, I mean, I have clients who are trade schools, and I think that there are the idea that you're going to have the schools that train for the uses in that section. I think that's clever. I like that, and that's a good thought. But the Fairview focus area is an odd mix, but it is still backing up to residential areas where people are concerned about the values of their residential property and how their use and enjoyment of their own property is going to be impacted. And the multiple density, multiple uses, multiple businesses, and will change the characters of the neighborhood. We're only going to change the character of town and I'm not sure it's for the better. That's what we got.
Warner?
I've got two buckets that I want to talk about. The first bucket is that I passed out an affordable housing article that came out of the Chicago Tribune for Highland Park. And my question for the council would be, how amenable is the council to take a look at a grant structure to build affordable housing, which is what they did in Highland Park? Because we've not talked about that tonight. And with that grant structure, in that article, it also references that what Highland Park was looking at was having the cashiers that we come into contact with daily in the stores being able to live in the community. And that was one of the underlying goals. My second bucket goes back to your slide on land uses. And that's something that I've got a degree of familiarity with because I've been involved with that. And if we take a look, there, what was the one? It was for the sheltered care. What is that? Sheltered care on the bottom. Sheltered care nursing home is one group where you're dealing with a for-profit type of arrangement. What I've been involved with has been with the group homes and the group living and even scattered site housing for persons with special needs. And my involvement has been with two agencies, one where we had like a group home, and the group home was basically, we went into a community, worked with the community, we bought an apartment building that was 21 units, and, you know, it was one of these U-shaped types of things with the garden in the middle and all that kind of stuff. We got HUD funding, we remodeled the whole thing, you know, from top to bottom, which then became an asset to the community. We also had staff that lived there 24 hours a day. Not the same staff, but they had an apartment, and therefore there was 24-hour staff coverage. So if there were issues, but most of the people under the guidelines that we had there had to be going to school, had to be working, something along those lines, and had to have, you know, like some kind of special needs grants. That worked out very well for that community. The other one that I was involved with was when we were taking a look, like when you look at the nursing home and sheltered care, once you get into that kind of a system, it becomes very difficult to get out of that system. And the nursing homes, they may refer you to another facility, but it's always within their same brand. So you can transition from skilled care to intermediate care to sheltered care, ICF, all of those kinds of things. One of the projects that I was involved with was that the state of Illinois was sued because the state of Illinois did not have housing facilities, and therefore the nursing homes were the providers of housing. The nursing homes did not worry about rehabilitation. What our job was to evaluate people who were in the nursing homes to see where they wanted to live. And I have referenced that in the past, where we then worked with the community of LaGrange. And what the community of LaGrange said is that if people who are in nursing homes, and granted this was a special grant, so I'm using that as an example, but people who were wanting to live in the LaGrange area who had special needs, that they then would set up housing for them and take them into the community. Those two programs both worked out very well. The one program, we were dealing with rental units where the people transitioning from nursing homes went into rental units. Those were then subsidized through grants. The other, we bought the buildings outright, rehabbed the buildings with HUD grants, and then had people living in there. And therefore, what I'm wondering about, because it falls under the idea of affordable housing, but also responding to people with special needs. We've not had that kind of a discussion tonight. And I just like to raise that as some kind of a future point to look at.
Okay, thank you all. Anything else from the council for tonight? Chris?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to staff. A ton of information distilled in a way that we can have this kind of discussion so efficiently, and all these things we're doing moving, like, awesome job. This has been the best part of this experience, has been seeing how we're getting through these things, I think, in a complete way, but also very efficiently. The fact that we're already talking this stuff is fantastic. So thank you very much to Stan and the whole team. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just special shout out to Jason doing all the graphics. So
Yeah.
appreciate all those models. Really help turn this discussion forward. Stuff. So thank you all. Thank everybody on the side too.
Yeah. Cool.
Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Good night.